In Yellowstone, there is a pool of water that does not look real even when you are standing in front of it. A deep blue center burns outward into rings of green, yellow, orange, and red, as if the Earth somehow learned how to paint with heat. It looks less like a spring and more like a giant living eye staring back from the ground. And the first question it creates is immediate. How can one body of water hold so many colors at once without any of them fading away? In Yellowstone National Park, there is a place where color stops behaving the way your mind expects it to. From above, Grand Prismatic Spring looks almost impossible. A deep blue center sits in the middle, surrounded by bright rings of green, yellow, orange, and red. Steam drifts across the surface like breath. The whole spring feels too vivid, too balanced, too perfect to look natural. It does not look like ordinary water. It looks painted. That is what makes this place so powerful. It is not just beautiful. Plenty of places are beautiful. Grand Prismatic Spring is unsettling because it looks edited even when it is completely real. The human brain is used to one body of water having one dominant color. A lake is blue, a pond might be green, muddy water turns brown. But here, one pool seems to hold an entire spectrum at the same time. And that immediately creates tension, because if the image looks fake, then the location becomes more than scenery. It becomes a mystery. And yet the truth is even more interesting than fantasy. Grand Prismatic Spring is colorful because of a combination of heat, water, minerals, light, and microscopic life. Yellowstone sits on top of one of the most geologically active landscapes in the world. Heat rises from below the Earth's surface. Groundwater gets heated, and that water returns upward through the ground. What reaches the surface is not just hot water. It is part of a larger geothermal system, one powerful enough to create geysers, vents, mud pots, and hot springs that look like they belong on another planet. Grand Prismatic is the largest hot spring in the United States, and part of what makes it so visually overwhelming is its scale. It is not a tiny, colorful puddle. It is a massive spring, wide enough that the colors spread across it like zones on a map. The center is the hottest part, and that heat matters. The water there is so hot that most microbial life cannot thrive in the same way it can around the cooler edges. Because of that, the center stays clearer. And that clarity allows the water to reflect and scatter light in a way that makes the blue look rich, deep, and almost electric. But the outer rings are where the spring becomes unforgettable. As the temperature drops away from the center, the environment becomes suitable for different kinds of heat-loving microorganisms. These tiny organisms form microbial mats around the edges of the spring, and their pigments create the yellows, oranges, reds, and greens people see from above. So, what looks like random beauty is actually organized life. The spring is not colorful by accident. It is colorful because different living communities are thriving in different temperature zones. That idea changes the whole experience. Because now, you are not just looking at one strange pool. You are looking at a visible temperature map made by biology. The hot blue center tells one story. The cooler orange and red edges tell another. Every ring around the spring is evidence that life has adapted to extreme conditions in a very specific way. In other words, Grand Prismatic Spring is not just a natural wonder. It is a place where science becomes visible. And that may be the most mind-blowing part. The colors are not there for decoration. The spring is not trying to be beautiful. It is simply revealing what happens when heat, water, minerals, sunlight, and microorganisms interact in one of the most extreme landscapes in America. But to the human eye, the result feels almost too artistic to be real. It looks like paint spilled into water. It looks like a giant iris staring upward from the Earth. It looks like something designed to shock you. That visual effect gets even stronger from above. At ground level, steam can hide some of the color, and the spring feels more mysterious than complete. But from an aerial view, the entire shape suddenly makes sense. The center becomes an intense blue core. The outer zones expand like glowing rings. The steam drifts over the surface in a way that makes the spring seem alive, as if it is breathing. That is why Grand Prismatic photographs so well. From the sky, it stops looking like a pool and starts looking like a symbol. And the symbolism matters because the spring triggers something deep in the human mind. It resembles an eye. It has a center, an edge, and a pattern that feels intentional. Humans are wired to react to shapes like that. We notice circles. We notice symmetry. We notice things that seem to look back at us. So Grand Prismatic Spring does not just feel beautiful, it feels aware. Not literally alive in a conscious way, but visually charged in a way that makes it hard to see it as passive scenery. That is part of what makes Yellowstone such a perfect home for it. Yellowstone is already a place where the Earth feels restless. Geysers erupt. Steam rises out of the ground. The land bubbles, cracks, and releases heat in ways that remind you something immense is happening below the surface. Grand Prismatic Spring feels like the visual climax of that whole landscape. If Yellowstone is a place where the Earth reveals its hidden power, Grand Prismatic is where that power becomes color. This is where the impact on modern life becomes impossible to ignore, because Grand Prismatic Spring now exists in two worlds at once. It exists as a real geothermal feature in Yellowstone, and it exists as one of the most viral natural images on Earth. It appears in travel content, documentaries, photography, science education, and online posts that spread because the spring looks almost too surreal to trust. It is one of those rare places that can stop people in the middle of scrolling, simply because the image looks impossible. But that popularity creates tension too. The spring is beautiful because it is delicate. The surrounding thermal areas are sensitive. The microbial communities that create those colors depend on very specific conditions. This is not the kind of place humans can treat casually. And that gives Grand Prismatic Spring an important role in modern life. It reminds us that the places we are most eager to photograph are often the ones that need the most protection. Viral beauty is still fragile beauty. There is also something bigger happening here. Grand Prismatic changes the way you think about color in nature. Most people assume color is superficial, just a surface detail, something that makes a place prettier. But here, color is the evidence. Color is temperature. Color is biology. Color is adaptation. Color is survival. The spring teaches you that beauty in nature is not always separate from science. Sometimes beauty is science made visible. So why is this lake every color at once? Because the hottest blue center stays clear enough to reflect and scatter light in a powerful way. Because the cooler edges allow different microbial communities to grow in layers around the spring. Because those microorganisms produce pigments that appear as green, yellow, orange, and red. And because Yellowstone is one of the few places on Earth where geology, heat, and life come together so perfectly that one body of water can look like an entire spectrum. And maybe that is the real power of Grand Prismatic Spring. Not just that it is beautiful, but that it feels like proof that Earth is still more imaginative than we are. One pool of water becomes blue at the center, then green, then yellow, then orange, then red. One geothermal spring becomes part chemistry, part biology, part illusion, and part art. And standing there, or even just seeing it from above, you realize something strange and unforgettable. Nature does not need fantasy to create impossible colors. It has been doing that all along. If Grand Prismatic Spring made you feel like nature can turn heat into color, like this video and subscribe to Off the Map. Because next, we are going somewhere that looks just as unreal for a completely different reason. White Sands, New Mexico. Why is this desert pure white? And when you see endless dunes glowing like snow under a desert sky, the question will not be whether it is beautiful. It will be how an entire desert can look that clean, that bright and that impossible.